Good afternoon. Good morning. Depending on where you are, I am going to give it a few minutes for hopefully some folks to join. And we can then get started. Looks like I have some folks joining. Thank you. Good morning. Good afternoon. Give people some time to get in, and then I'll get started. Do my intro and then get into our topic this morning is what's your question? And we're going to be talking about tiny house parking. So I am going to wait just another minute or so. Good morning, good afternoon. Hello. All right, it's a minute after. I'm going to wait a couple more minutes. Good morning. Southern cold California. We've got warm weather today, so that's unusual for you all. I'm sorry to hear that, but I'm enjoying our sunshine and unusually warm weather, even though we all know that's not a good thing right now from a global warming perspective, but that's another conversation. All right, I am going to give it one more minute and then I'm going to um, kick off before we get started in the conversation. Hello from Maryland. Good afternoon. Just a thought it might be helpful to post a notification 10 to 30 minutes before you begin. So I do that on social media. I post a reminder on Instagram as well as on Facebook. And if you are subscribed to the channel and you subscribe to notifications, you should get an automatic notification. So thank you for that suggestion. But if you subscribe, I'm hoping that it does all of that work for me. Grand Rising, hello. I knew you meant grand, so no worries. Good afternoon from sunny Florida. I am a little jealous. You've got sunshine and the ocean, maybe, depending on where you're located. Well, thank you all very much for joining. I am going to do my intro and then we'll get started this afternoon. So thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are located. My name is Jewel Pearson and this is Miss Bohemian Soul TV. Let me change over to my intro slide. There we go. This is Creating Home, a tiny house series, and this segment is the What's Your Question segment. And this is where I answer frequently asked tiny house questions. I alternate on Sundays between content. The alternating Sunday, we are in conversation, and it's the conversations on intimate spaces. Um, Every Sunday, I'm offering live content. And to kind of introduce myself, I like to say that I built a kind of fancy tiny house in 2015. And since that time, I have been sharing my journey to hopefully inspire others who are interested in the movement. I do offer coaching and one on one consultations to help others in their tiny house journey. And you can find links to schedule with me in the video description that will be posted once this video goes live. It will be in the content below. And along the way, I serve up a lot of representation in the movement. It is my intent to build figurative and literal community that is inclusive and accessible. I want us to be able to see ourselves in this movement. So if you find this information and the video helpful, I ask that you please like it, share it, subscribe to the channel, and be sure to turn on the notification so you'll get notified when content is upcoming and when content is available. So thank you all very much for being here. Thank you so much. Um, Thank you for being here. We're going to get started. I am going to actually have a slide that I'm going to talk to this morning. And what we are um, talking about this morning is let me change one of the most frequently asked questions that is asked all the time, which is where can I park a tiny house? And it is one of the things that it isn't actually a deterrent for some people because there are a lot of challenges with tiny house parking. And so I have covered this conversation before, this question before in episode 3. I'm not exactly sure I'll cover all of the content, but between episode 3 and this episode, I am hoping that I will answer those questions and you'll have some references that you can refer to help you in this, in the tiny house parking process. And so let me say that as we are talking about parking this morning, as we are talking about parking today, I am speaking specifically to tiny houses. Move over here. Tiny houses on wheels. And so I am not speaking to tiny houses on foundation. If you are building a tiny house on foundation, you will then follow the rules for whatever city or county you are building in. And first, you'd have to find out to ensure that they don't have rules around minimum square footage. And once you clear that and they don't have any rules around minimum square footage, you will go through the exact build process that a traditional or conventional house on foundation goes through. Working with the city, the county, through permitting, your builder should be able to do all of that work for you and have some expertise in that area. And you will follow all of their established rules for building if you're building a tiny house on foundation. So that is not what we will be talking about today. We will also not be talking about um, park models. And so park models, you can kind of Google it. I don't have a picture to share with you this morning. Park models are often called tiny houses. They are smaller. They are oftentimes a little bit bigger than and I'm saying traditional tiny houses on built on custom tiny house trailers. They are sometimes up in the 500 square foot range, even a little bit larger. Um, they're generally wider than tiny houses on wheels as well. They are HUD regulated, HUD manufactured, and so there are some specific rules and places that they can be located. I'm not speaking to those. That is different from a tiny house on wheels. So when I'm speaking to a tiny house on wheels, I'm talking about a house like mine. I'm talking about a tiny house that is built on a custom trailer. It is generally under 400 square feet. Mine is a little bit larger now, as you all know, because I've added on to my house, but the part that I've added on is not on that custom trailer. So I'm talking about the tiny house on wheels on the custom trailer that is either a DIY build or you're working with a tiny house builder to build it. I am not speaking to an RV, which is, the metal chassis. I'm not speaking to any of that or van dwelling. I'm talking, and some of this might apply to van dwelling, but I'm speaking specifically to tiny houses on wheels. So I want to clarify that as we're going through this conversation. I also want to clarify that the rules for tiny house parking, they are made at the city and county level. They are not made at the state level. So you can't say, I want to place my tiny house in Georgia. What are the rules for tiny houses in Georgia? The rules are going to vary per city, per county. So you would then have to say, okay, I want to move to Georgia, but I am moving to the city of Atlanta or the city of Doraville, Lawrenceville, some of those cities, and then you would then have to investigate what the rules are for those specific cities and counties, and they can vary from city to county, city to city, and county to county, even though the city and the county might be located right next to each other. So it is not enough to say you can't say what are the rules for Georgia. You'll need to investigate at that city and county level. And when you are asking the questions around what the rules are for city and county level, you'll be speaking to zoning. Zoning is going to determine that what is allowed on a piece of property. Building code enforcement deals with the rules around how the home is built, and they work together. So you would then be in conversation with building code enforcement and with zoning to understand whether tiny houses are allowed in the specific area that you're interested in. I recommend as you are having, if you are, and so one other thing. So as I'm talking through placement for tiny houses, there's going to be some information for the people who will want to follow the rules and the rule followers. And then I'm also going to be talking to people who have decided, okay, it's not allowed in my area. I'm just going to do it kind of under the radar. So perhaps you're asking for permission. It's not allowed, but you still decide to do what you're going to do. Uh, my disclaimer I always put out there is I'm not encouraging anyone in any direction to do something that they should not do, but it is constantly being done, and it is how counterparts are doing it, and they've been successful in the movement. I've been successful in the movement, kind of being under the radar. I have asked for permission a couple of times, and so anyway, so just to clarify all of that. But if you are trying to follow the rules and you want to specifically know what the rules are in your city or a city or county that you've identified, my recommendation is to always call the city, the county. I don't necessarily recommend that you give all of your information. Don't blow up your own spot. Just call and ask for generic information. You don't have to give the address that you're interested in. You could just simply say, I am interested in the tiny house rules for this city, for this county. Can you tell me what they are? Sometimes a city or county, and specifically or more, it happens more in, I would say, rural areas or smaller cities and counties. They may not have rules established already for tiny houses. You can also look on their website. They often will have all of their rules listed on their website, so you can see if they have something specific already listed. If you don't see anything, then you call and you're asking questions. Again, anonymous. You don't want to necessarily give up all of your information and point them in your direction. Depending, and that is going to, help you in deciding which direction you're going. If you're deciding, if they say no and you still decide that you're going to do it, you don't want to have given them all of your details. But in the conversation, so if you determine they don't have rules established and you want to be on the side of legality in your tiny house, then I always recommend um, providing them with a proposal of, you all don't have rules. I've identified this property in this city, this county that I'd like to place my tiny house on wheels on, and I'd like to present this proposal. And then go through the process with them to request conversations and meetings with the people who are making those decisions and present your proposal. Obviously, you want to have a well thought out proposal, so you want to be able to assure them that your house is built safely, that you followed building codes as much as possible for the build of your house. Using a professional, a licensed electrician, using professional plumber. Appendix Q of the IRC code speaks to some building code, some rules for building tiny houses on foundation. You can use some of those same rules to build for a tiny house on wheels. So you want to assure them that, and have it documented, that you followed some type of formatting of some type of code, I should say, for your bill, so that your house is safe. You also want to have a plan for your waste. You want to give them all of the details. You want to, one of the things that I've talked about with my tiny house, as I put it on a location, I use I've had now I'm not going to be able to think of their name, but oh my God. it'll come back to me. A professional, somebody who wrote out a plan for me, a tie down plan for, the word is not going to come to me right now, but a professional tie down plan. So as I put my house on a location, I use tie downs that, and you can Google this, mobile homes have tie downs that it goes in, it's a metal brackets. Sometimes people I've seen use a type of a chain. It's not a like a chain link fence, but it's something that is in concrete, goes in the ground, so that and I have them in both on both corners of my home, and in the middle to hold my, and it's in concrete in the ground to hold my house down. My house doesn't move in so far I've experienced like 70-mile-per-hour winds. My house is kind of heavy and sturdy, so it doesn't bounce around. But what this does is and mobile homes again use it, is provide another level of safety that your house is, even should a major storm come and you're going to have to evacuate, it is a safety precaution to help you um, in keeping the structure on the ground. It is not fail proof. Obviously, you see homes and mobile homes fly around all the time. It is not fail proof. It is not something that I would say, oh, I've got that in place and I'm going to stay in my home during this storm when it's a major storm. I'm still following the rules for evacuation. But yes, thank you. Someone says it anchors the structure to the foundation. In this case, because I don't have a foundation, it is anchoring the structure within the ground. So these spikes are dug down into the ground with concrete, and they then are attached to my home so that it is providing some stability. So you want to have all of these things outlined in your plan as you're asking these officials for permission, so that they can see, you've thought it out, what the benefit is, that perhaps it's a property that is not buildable from a conventional home size perspective. Maybe it's a blighted, I think that's the right word, piece of property that you would like to purchase and then use it for your home. And so you want to offer them, how you will raise the property value of whatever property you're interested in bringing your home into the community. As I have been trying to speak to tiny house communities in certain areas, I always speak to the fact that most tiny house people work from home. Most tiny house people are basically self-contained, and so if this area would allow me to would consider a tiny house in their area, what they would then be doing is bringing people into their community who are going to spend money in the community. They're going to shop in that community. They're not going to be taking jobs because they work from home, because you want to make sure that you're not raising concerns for them. But in your proposal, again, you want to make sure it's well thought out as you're having these conversations with them. There's plenty of information on the internet where people have, not plenty, let me take that back. There is information on the internet where people have successfully had these type conversations. There's information on the internet about statistics about people who live in their tiny houses. So put together a well thought out presentation so that you then, are kind of stacking the deck so that this area might be more open to considering it. A plug for me, again, I've said I offer one-on-one consultations. These are the things that I absolutely can assist with if you're interested in my assistance. And I will, good morning. I will be, all of those links, the information for scheduling with me will be in the description. So that is my suggestion. If you want to follow the rules, go that route, and those are the steps that you would want to take to engage in those conversations. All right. The other thing that my kind of disclaimer in tiny house living in, as we're moving into kind of the under the radar method, where you've asked for permission, it's been denied, and you decide, I still am going to live in my tiny house. I'm going to build this house, and you're going to exist kind of under the radar. Again, I'm not advocating for doing something that you're not supposed to. However, so my disclaimer is that tiny house living is not for the faint of heart, because right now it is not widely acceptable. It is not widely legal. And so it is living in a state where, um, other people have the ability to make decisions for you that might impact your location. You might have to move. So that is my disclaimer. Tiny house living is not for the faint of heart. So if you are the person that needs stability and you are the person that, thank you. If you are the person that needs to know I am going to be able to be on this location, no one's going to bother me. And this is the location I can be for 5 to 10 years or whatever your plan is. This and you've not gotten, if the permission has not been granted, tiny house living might not be for you right now until either you change the minds of the people, in that are making the rules in your city or county, or until overall cities and counties start to get it that tiny houses are beneficial for them. So that is my disclaimer, and I say it to everyone. Tiny house living is not for the faint of heart, right now, for people that are interested in the movement. But I will also with that, this May I will have lived in my home for 8 years. I share that I am kind of existing under the radar. I don't always share where I'm located for that specific reason. I have absolutely had to move my house. I am on a friend's farm at this point. I had previously been within the city of Charlotte in someone's backyard. I've been in a couple of backyards in the city of Charlotte. The last time I was in the city of Charlotte, I was 3 miles from uptown Charlotte. They call their downtown uptown. I was very convenient and happy location for me because I am a city girl. I have been there for 2 years. The neighborhood started going through, gentrification, so building code enforcement and zoning, started coming in and out of the neighborhood, and that is how they became aware of my home. I don't advertise wheels on my homes, like on my house, like I have wrapping around my house, so they weren't, when they saw my house, they really weren't sure what it was. They actually thought it was that the homeowner had built an unpermitted accessory dwelling unit in their backyard. And so what they ticketed or cited him for was an unpermitted ADU, and they told him that he needed to work with the city to get it permitted. Um, I attempted to go through the process. Obviously, I knew I was going to have to tell them that it was a tiny house on wheels, because going through the permitting process was going to mean that they were going to need to, um, inspect the house. So it was going to be obvious, real quick, that it was not an accessory dwelling unit built on foundation, that it was on wheels. So I went ahead, shared that information, went through the process that I was trying to, share with you. I have a proposal, a structural engineer, that is the name I was trying to get before. I've had a structural engineer provide, the tie down plan for me. Everywhere I go, I put this tie down plan in place. I identified all of the information about my build. I've used licensed contractors, licensed electrician, plumbing, all of those details, and we went round and round probably for about 3 months. And I will honestly say that the lower level people within, um, zoning was okay with it. Zoning was like, we're fine with it if building code enforcement says it is okay. In my early conversations, they were saying that they would need to examine my house to ensure it was safe, and that was going to look like, cutting into the walls to see the bill since my house was already built. I was fine with that because I could repair it. I just really wanted them to examine it, sign off on it. If there was something they felt like I needed to fix, let me determine whether that was fixable for me, and kind of leave me alone. Um, and again, I was getting ready to say lower level, code enforcement was actually okay with it, and they were actually, a lot of those people also are interested in tiny houses, and so they were okay with it. The process was really, annoying in that they wouldn't deal with me directly. I had to hire an architect. I have an architect that I work with, so I rehired him. They would only talk to the architect and go through this process. And then, as we got to the end of the process, had provided all of the information that they had required. Someone forwarded the information to their supervisor. And the supervisor, without considering any of the work that had been done, the previous conversations, any of that, came back and said, we won't consider this because it is on wheels. That wasn't a surprise. Everybody who had been involved in the process already knew it was on wheels. He just didn't take the time to examine the conversation, ask some questions. He wasn't willing to think out of the box because all of them knew it was on wheels, and they were willing to consider it based on if it passed all of these additional tests that they had. So that is how the conversation got shut down, just because this person wasn't open to considering something outside of the box. Charlotte has a terrible unhoused population, but Charlotte is very focused right now on the big dollar apartments and expensive homes, and so they are not interested in tiny houses because that's not a big money maker for them. So they completely shut the conversation down, and then I relocated my home. Um, for me, again, where I say tiny houses, the placement is not for the faint of heart. I have known since I built my house that there would be the challenge of where can I place my house. But I also have felt like I can trust that it is going to work out. And that is what I have done. Again, that is kind of the way my maybe I'm more of a risk taker than you may be. I just know that I'm going to figure it out, and I'm going to have a plan A, B, C, and D, and then just keep it moving. And that has worked for me successfully for 8 years. Each individual has to do what is best for them. So, but I do share my story. Um, all right, so all of those things, and then as kind of the disclaimers, and then so let me talk about, so you've decided this conversation is going to be for the person who um, is kind of going to be under the radar. Some of it will apply to someone if you're going to ask permission to do these things. Some of these things, these are locations for you as well. So the first place, where can I place a tiny house on wheels? Personal or private property and in backyards. I just shared how I had I my home has been located in two backyards, and it was someone else's property. Um, Maybe you have your own personal property that you want to place the tiny house on. Depending on, again, if you're asking permission, that's kind of you're going to follow the rules once they identify what those rules are for you for these locations. If you are under the radar, um, these options, as you're considering these options, you want to kind of ensure it is not a high profile location that you're going to place the tiny house on. It is definitely not going to be a backyard of a home that is in a neighborhood with an HOA. You will be there for a whole 10 minutes before somebody comes in and requires that you move. As I say, in the cut. You want to kind of be in the cut so that you're not advertising, I have a tiny house on wheels, and everybody is seeing the home and knows that you're there. Um, it is also, sometimes it is if you're in an area, you move your house in a backyard, the curiosity of a next door neighbor who might say, oh my God, I love tiny houses. I'd love to have a tiny house in my backyard. And then they call the city or the county and say, hey, my neighbor has a tiny house in his backyard. What are the rules? They didn't necessarily mean to blow up your spot, but then the city says, oh, that's not allowed. And then now you have an issue. So those are the things that you really need to be aware of as you're making these decisions. Also, if you're going, you also need to scope out the backyard to make sure not only do you have some privacy, I mean privacy for your own sake, as well as not necessarily advertising that this home is back there, but also ensuring that it's enough room for your home, the size of your home. You can navigate getting your house in there around trees, all of those things. You definitely have to do your scoping out if you're doing personal private property backyard. Um, One of the other things that I'll say about this is one of the things that people get confused about is they'll say, well, this is my property. I bought this property. I can do what I want on this property. That is absolutely not true. It could be your property. You could have purchased the property. But if the rules say tiny houses can't be there, the city, the county has the right to say you have to move it, even though it is your property. They make the rules for those areas. So I just want to clarify that. To find backyards. I see someone saying they have room in their backyard. To find these locations, I have been very successful in placing ads on Craigslist. And when I first started, this was, 2015, before tiny houses were even a thing. People thought I was weird, but now people are accustomed to what tiny houses are and what the ask is. And so placing an ad on Craigslist, and I recommend doing it on all of the pages in Craigslist, even the pages that aren't relative to land or rent or something like that. But because you never know who's looking to buy, um, you know, I think like washing machines or something, like things for sale, that somebody could be looking to buy a washing machine and see your ad there in that section, and they might have property and be interested in it. So I always say put your ad across all of the options within Craigslist. Give some background about yourself. Obviously, don't give all of your information. Background about yourself, what you're looking for, that you're interested in paying rent, because then the person understands what's in it for them. And that they understand could help them financially. If you have animals, make that clear up front. Make it clear that you'll need access to their existing electric and possibly water, if you're going to need access to water, unless you're storing your water. Um, I don't recommend having a regular flush toilet and needing to go this route, because it is almost impossible to, and I'm using quote fingers, it's not impossible, but it's close to impossible for having a flush toilet, asking someone to allow you to go in their backyard, and then needing to tap into their sewage system. That is, one, expensive. Two, you should be getting a permit for that, and the homeowner is likely going to say, because obviously you're excuse me, dealing with feces. That's when people get sick. You don't want to mess around with that. So you need to have a self-contained type toilet so that you really only need access to possibly water and electricity. And then with that, you need the property owner, if you, again, are under the radar, you're not asking for permission, you need the property owner to understand that you'll need to tap off of the existing power that is already available on the property and the water. When I do that, when I am asking for that, I always say I am willing to pay. I am willing to bring in my licensed electrician to do this, so that the person knows it will be a professional that will do this. But the thing that you have to be clear on is we're not going to ask the city for permission to do this. I am going to bring my electrician, and obviously you have to have a relationship with an electrician that's willing to do this without needing a permit. But I am going to bring my electrician in, and we are going to connect to your existing systems. And so if the person is saying, I prefer to contact the city and have this all of my I's dotted, my T's crossed, then that's not going to be the location for you, because then obviously you already know it's not allowed, and so then you're going to run into issues. So that's the main thing. There's also Facebook groups that there are Facebook groups for different cities, states. There's main Facebook groups where everybody is posting, "Hey, I'm in this area. I'm in this area." And you can always find you can find locations that way. get involved in the local Facebook group, and people can direct you. In these Facebook groups, there are oftentimes people who are looking for parking as well as people who have property and are interested in allowing you to park on their property. As an aside, sometimes if you are in a backyard, I know that some people will then first I'll say always have a rental agreement, a lease agreement in place. You want to protect yourself. You want to protect the homeowner. You want to be clear that you own the house. You are renting a parking place from this person. I go into that on. I think I went into that a little bit more in one of the other videos. But I also can provide specifics in consultation in how to navigate the rental agreement. But you want to obviously have that in writing. Word of mouth is not ever going to work, even with family. You want to have it in writing. Um, Oftentimes, people will have a lease agreement that kind of says, should anybody ask, that you are a tenant of the house on the property. I'm renting a room in the house, and this structure, this tiny house in the backyard, is a studio. And so then you're really again in that gray area saying, I don't live in this tiny house. It is a studio, and that kind of sometimes goes a little bit further when officials are saying, okay, it's not a home where someone lives full time. It is a studio, a work studio. Again, these are kind of the operating in that gray area and trying to make things happen. Word of mouth is also a very good way to find locations. You never know, and social media for me has worked well as also. You never know who has some property that where it would work for you until you actually ask the question. And sometimes people haven't even considered that that's an option that they'd like to do. But word of mouth is also a really good way. All right, I think that's it for the personal private property backyards. Tiny house communities. There are tiny house communities throughout several states. I will list some of them, a link to some of them in the description. Um, they are I would say they are more sporadic, not as commonplace, but they absolutely do exist. So if you're interested in community, tiny house community might be a consideration. For me, and again, I'm serving up representation, so we have real conversations here. Obviously, you want to ensure that the tiny house community is going to be a safe space for you. Oftentimes tiny house communities are in rural areas. Tiny house communities are, because we're not in the movement as a predominant force. Sometimes there are some tiny house communities that aren't necessarily um, you all already know what I'm saying. Ensure that your safety as a person of color, as a black person, indigenous person, is going to be a priority. I have when I say that, I have been invited to certain areas where mountainous regions where I know I wouldn't necessarily feel 100% comfortable. And so and I'm not speaking to any communities that I'm going to post links to. So before somebody says, oh, she's talking about such and such community, I'm not talking about anything specific. I'm talking about another opportunity where a community was being built. Just in that area, as I rode around, I knew that wasn't an area where I would feel comfortable, where I would feel safe. And so my answer was no. So do your due diligence in researching the community. And so RV parks and campgrounds, the same thing that I'm saying for tiny house communities in doing your due diligence to ensure it's a safe space. I've shared multiple times that I have actually relocated my home from an RV park because I was not in a safe space. RV parks, tiny houses, RVs. There is a contingent of people um, that are interested in this, and they are also racist. And so that kind of goes hand in hand. A lot of, if you're in some of the tiny house groups, some of the older tiny house groups, you'll know that a lot of people interested in tiny houses are also anti-government and this and that, and some of that all sometimes all of that goes hand in hand with racism. I'm not generalizing people, but I'm just saying what I've experienced. So, is as a person of color, do your due diligence to ensure that the RV parks and the campgrounds, the tiny house communities are going to be safe spaces before you get into your build and just choose this community and decide you're going there, and then you realize this isn't what I should have done, and now you've got to come up with a plan B, C, and D. Um, um, and so my bottom bullet, where I have tiny house trailblazers, cooperative and collective communities, right here I will say within the collective communities, and this is on the tiny house trailblazer site. I'm going to talk about the cooperative communities in just a few minutes, but the collective communities, that's on the website, I have a link to some RV parks and campgrounds that are owned by African Americans, Black people. And so if you're interested in RV parks that are owned by African Americans, there is a link on my Tiny House Trailblazer site to provide some information there. Um, Another location for placing a tiny house is going to be farms, agricultural land, and rural areas. And so farms and land that is zoned as agricultural, you could the rural areas are often more accepting of tiny houses. They're more accepting and familiar with people living in RVs, people living in mobile homes. So a tiny house on wheels is not a foreign concept for them. Oftentimes they don't have rules around them, so they are again more interested in this conversation. They also these are the areas that I've tried to have conversations around building tiny house community, because rural areas oftentimes you will hear people say people in rural areas are um, land rich and cash poor. So they have land, but they don't have cash, they don't have income. And so one of the things that you can speak to as if you're going the route for approval is that, again, what I was just saying earlier, I'm bringing my income into this area. I don't need to look for a job in this area. I'm bringing income into this area. I will spend money within this area. A tiny house community will bring income into this area. We'll spend money on electricity. We'll use your resources. So again, that's money that's coming into the bottom line, and it brings some awareness to this area if you're allowing other people to come into this area because you've got a tiny house community. And so consider that as if you're asking for permission and speaking to officials in the area. Also, agricultural land is zoned for farming. So oftentimes there are more rules that are permissible to um, small homes, tiny houses on wheels could be considered in that category for farmers. And so, and you can have multiple homes on agricultural land because you would have farmers working on this agricultural land. Or you can have farm buildings. And so, farm buildings not necessarily speak to residential, but I'm going to have several sheds. I'm teaching agricultural, blah, blah, blah. I offer tours. And so those are the ways that you could bring um, tiny houses into onto a farm or an agricultural a land that is zoned as agricultural, rural areas. Again, I am going to say, give you the same disclaimer uh, from tiny house communities, RV parks, and campgrounds, rural areas. As a person of color, black person, indigenous person, you have to be aware of that rural area. Not only have I had to move my house from an RV park, I also had to move my house from a farm in a rural area. I have shared that later on because on the farm that I was on, people in the area needed to know what the black people were doing on this farm. Are you building an ISIS? And they would come on the property and ask these questions. Are you building an ISIS commune? Um, privilege allows you to think it is okay to do all of these things. They would come on the property at night, through the property, looking through the property. I would have to ask people to leave the property. I've been cussed out. I had been cussed out because someone felt like they had a right to being on property they knew they did not own. I mean, and it became a scary and uncomfortable position for me. I chose to, my house stayed there for a while, and I actually got an apartment, and I left my house there until I could figure out where I was going next. As I found a location to move my home later on, the farmer who was actually working with that property is now living on the property, and he encountered problems with those same people in the area, and someone was later arrested for um, racial intimidation. So there was a problem in that area. It is, as our political climate changes, all of these things happen. You all watch the news, you all see the things that are happening. And so it is not a foreign conversation to say you have to consider your safety. And so that is something that I will absolutely scary, infuriating, and not surprising. I was not surprised at all. Um, Disappointed, but not surprised. And so all of these things you need to keep in mind as a person of color in this movement. And this is why these conversations are so important for me to have with you all, because my counterparts aren't having to have these conversations. This isn't something that you'll see discussed in Tiny House mainstream, but it is important for the safety of us, and we should be able to be in this movement and be in this movement safely. So there is an awareness needed that these are concerns, and we need to be aware of the concerns. Um, I see your other question about the collective. I'm going to come back to that. Um, and then let me see if there's anything else I need to talk about farms. Again, if you are asking for permission means that you're then working with the city or the county, and they're going to allow you access to utilities, water, power. If you're working with the city or county and they're giving you permission, you could also then connect to sewage, all of those things. If you are not asking for permission and you're going to exist in these spaces, then what that looks like is you're going to move your tiny house on these places, and you're going to connect to the electricity, the utilities, electricity, the water of buildings that are on these existing properties. So with that, if you are trying to buy a piece of property and it has nothing on it, and you're trying to, and you haven't gotten permission to live on this property, if it does not have existing utilities, you will not be successful unless your house is completely off grid on this standalone private property that does not have anything else there. If you've not gotten permission, because you will not be able to get access to power. Perhaps you could do a well and not get a permit, but as far as power, you'll always need access, approval, permitting from the city if you need to be connected to the electrical grid. If you are doing solar and you're completely off grid and you're in the cut and they don't know you back there, that's a different story. But I'm not familiar with that story. So just be aware that the rules, the shot callers make the rules and are going to determine, what you have access to. Okay. One, two, three, four. The fifth bullet here speaks to, so there are some tiny house states, friendly states, and tiny house friendly cities. Maine is a tiny house friendly state. If you're interested in living in Maine, you will be very successful living in a tiny house. They are very open and friendly to tiny houses. I don't have Portland here. I do know there more tiny house. I would say there are significantly more tiny houses in Portland than some of the other areas. I can't say it is a completely friendly state. They also have some challenges in racism within areas of Portland. But there is a larger contingent of tiny houses in Portland. Again, you'd have to have the conversation with the local officials there to determine a specific location. California is kind of leading the charge outside of Maine just being a completely tiny house friendly state. California is leading the charge in being tiny house friendly. There are several cities, and I think it's about seven at this point. I'll list them in the description that are tiny house friendly, and they will allow you to have a tiny house in the city, in the backyard of someone's home as an accessory dwelling unit. So accessory dwelling units, usually the rules for accessory dwelling units are that they have to be on foundation. And then a second rule for accessory dwelling units is usually that the the smaller house, and so the accessory dwelling unit is a smaller house in the back of a larger house. So usually it has to um, be on foundation, and it has to be owned by the person who owns the larger house. Those are generally the main big rules around accessory dwelling units. What California is allowing is tiny houses on wheels to be used as accessory dwelling units, and they are not requiring that the tiny house be owned by the same person who owns that home. And so they have opened the window for tiny house tiny houses on wheels to be located within cities. That's a beautiful thing because it also provides access to certain cities that other people may lower income people may not necessarily have access to. So, someone who can afford a tiny house but can't afford a large home in this California city now can be in this city and have access to the services, to the schools, all of the things that if they had money for, the hundreds of thousands of dollars that this large home is going to cost. Now they have access to all of this with a tiny house, and so. That is a really good thing. That is something that I have, as I was trying to talk to Charlotte, I was using their example. And you can see there, it's a lot of information about the cities that have adopted this. If you want to try to use their template in your conversations, or if you are interested in being in Maine or California. Um, and then the last bullet that I have here, which I think is six, is are resources that I have on the Tiny House Trailblazer site. So I spoke to the collective communities, which is a link to African American owned RV parks, Black owned RV parks, and campgrounds. They are throughout the country, and so you can have access to them via this link. I also have been doing some work around cooperative communities, which is a pairing of Black farmers and Black tiny house owners who are interested in, um, who are looking for a place to park. What this does is provide financial resources for Black farmers who, I'll share information in the description, who are losing their land. And when I say losing their land, the better word is having their land stolen. Losing has a different connotation. Their land is being stolen. And so this is for various reasons, racism being the core of the problem. But this is helping them financially. This is potentially helping them um, manage their farm if they need additional hands on assistance. It is not buying property from a farmer. This is actually renting land on that. I don't want to take anything from these farmers. I want to help them. So it is not selling land. It is renting parking on their land if they are if they're interested and open to doing it. You'd also be tapping off of, existing utilities. You'd want to have a rental agreement in place where you own the home. You're renting a parking spot. The here where I go back to tiny house living isn't for the faint of heart. One of the things that people end up getting frustrated with this program is that you have to be within just a few months of completing your tiny house before I will make the connection. Tiny farmers, their main work is farming. It is not to have a conversation with somebody who decides in a couple of years I want to build a tiny house. I'd like to see what my options are. Let me have some conversations with these farmers in this program. That is not what this program is going to do. It frustrates some people. I understand it, but If you need to have a definite spot, I'm going to point you to the tiny house communities. This is a cooperative opportunity, but it is not to cause someone, it is not to stress the farmers. They have enough on their plates. So this is for somebody who is already at the point where they recognize this is a risk. I'm building anyway. I don't have somewhere to place my house right now, but my house is almost finished, and I will then make the connections. Um, People send me nasty emails about it all the time. How can I build my house if I don't know where I'm going to place it? Again, tiny house living right now is not for the faint of heart. I understand the concern. You probably want to look into something that is legal, more legal. This is a pairing. This is not this is under the radar. This is, we want to help each other. How can we help each other? So let me put that disclaimer out there. The information for the form to complete if you're interested in renting your property, if you are landowner, information is out there for you to fill out that form. The information is out there for you to complete if you are a tiny house owner or planning to build. If you're planning to build down the line, it also asks you what's your timeline so that you can be in the database. I have it on pause right now. I am trying to find someone to automate this for me. It is a manual process, and as it grows, it is becoming a lot more work than I have time to put into it. So it is on pause, even though I am still taking applications. But again, I am trying to automate it. So if you, with this program, if you are not at the point where you're building in the next 3 months, which is the rule that I just spoke about, there is still a notification that you'll receive that tells you these are the areas right now where we have farmers that are potentially interested in allowing parking. So it does give you kind of an overview of what options are. It does not give you specifics. It does not give you contact information because, again, I'm not trying to waste a farmer's time for someone who, hasn't pulled the plug and is actually building. I hope that that makes sense to you, as to why you have to be in the process to actually be connected. So that is on the Tiny House Trailblazers website, the cooperative communities and the collective communities. It is not a private. There was a question. Let me add that question. Is the Tiny House Collective a private group website? No, these are public um, RV parks, campgrounds owned by Black people, African Americans, where everyone can go. It's just not campgrounds and RV parks for Black people, but they are Black owned. And so I call them out so that as a person of color, Black person, an Indigenous person wants to connect with someone where I can go to this campground and I'm not going to have, I'm not saying racism doesn't happen there, but you know that the owner is going to handle it and understand what the concern is. And so that is what this is. I think I have look at my notes, make sure I have spoken to all of the content that I had around tiny house parking. I think I have. Again, I have covered this. This is kind of a repeat of episode 3. There may be some more information in episode 3 that I spoke to that I didn't specifically share here, and vice versa. So if you are looking for tiny house parking, I would recommend that you look at this video as well as episode 3 to see if there are some other things that I spoke to that I did not cover here, and vice versa. Um, okay, I have done a lot of talking. I am going to look in the comments and see if there are any questions that I can answer. Okay, here is, I'm looking at the incredible tiny homes and that they are offering an 8 by 20 for 20K, and also the add a room option, an 8 by 16 foot edition. Both are on trailer. Those are good prices. I know someone who actually built with Incredible Tiny Homes. Incredible Tiny Homes, I think, is where you have the option to participate in your build, and I think that helps cut down on some of your costs. I could be off, but I think that's how that works. That pricing is good as far as the people that I know that have built with Incredible Tiny Homes, they have been Pleased with the build. I also believe that Incredible Tiny Homes has, I might be confusing them with someone. I kind of thought they were the builder that also had property that you could rent property. I could be wrong, but I've heard good things about Incredible Tiny Homes. That's an interesting option. The adder room, both are on trailers, so I'm guessing they're not connected, but you have two tiny houses. I'm not exactly sure how that works, but that is something good to look into. So thank you for sharing that information. Thank you, Melissa. I appreciate that. Um, hello. Okay, Motown Investor is saying they're looking into Incredible Tiny Homes too. They have land in Mississippi. Motown Investor, if you would like to complete the information, if you haven't already, on the Tiny House Trailblazers site, I can have you in that database and share your information. But I would also encourage you to share your information in some of the Facebook groups that are on. Obviously, they're online in some of the Facebook groups if you're looking for someone for your property. Um, let's see. Let me see. Let me see. Oh, you're very welcome, Mary. Um, all right. V. Cooper is saying, I'm on raw land and would love to be off grid. However, the rules call for permitted septic and a house any size on foundation. Um, yeah, that is one of the, I'm not sure. Well, I won't say I'm not sure. A lot of areas have problems with being off grid. Again, to me, at the end of the day, it's about money and finances. If you're off grid, you're not spending money with them. I do know, and I don't know the cost benefit around this, but I do know people who have gone through the motion of different adding different utilities, but then still at the end of the day having their home off grid just so that they could be allowed to be on the property, going through the motions of, yes, I'm checking the box, I will have these utilities, but still not using them. So I will throw that out there. I have no other information about how that works out from a financial perspective, if that's beneficial. And I also saw you say that they require a house on foundation. One of the things that you might want to ask, depending on the land and how it's zoned and where it's located, if they would consider the home being on piers, and that is the conversation that I was trying to have with the city of Charlotte in the backyard. So it's not on a traditional foundation, but it is on piers, and you can kind of Google that. It's kind of like the way mobile homes are. It provides a pseudo foundation. It is not the traditional foundation, but with piers as well as the tie down. Perhaps that's something they would consider. So you could offer it to them as an alternative to see if they'd be willing to do that. I hope it works out for you. I see that you're saying, oh, you're saying thinking of requesting to use a working shed for agricultural use and then to use it to get started with your house bill. Again, offer some suggestions, is make sure the suggestions are sound. You've thought through all of the holes. Sounds professional. It doesn't sound like you're a mess about to happen. And ask them. The only thing that they can do is say no. So I'll, feel free to ask. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thank you for the love from Ohio. I appreciate you following me. Um, Motown investor. I'm trying to build a tiny house community, but people have so many wants and needs beside a place to park. Um, if you're building a community, you offer what you're going to offer in that community, and people then have the option to say, yes, I want to be in that community, or no. And sometimes a list of, as I say about building a tiny house, and I suggest that you have a list of must-haves, nice-to-haves, and your wish list. a lot of times people go into things with having a long list of wants and needs, but then when it comes down to it and the options are slimmer, then that list dwindles down and they recognize the things that they really have to have. And so I would consider that versus trying to meet match everyone's needs. Let's see. Oh, thank you. I'm glad that you felt like this was good information. What do I think about the tiny home communities in North Carolina? I don't know the specific episode, but Regina, what is Regina's last name? I think it starts with an R. One of the episodes, I'll put a link to Regina Osborne. I interviewed her. She's a black woman. She lives in a tiny house community in North Carolina, closer to Asheville. She likes her community and recommends her community. I don't know anything. I don't have a personal experience with any of them, but I do know that she's recommended her community. I would say do your due diligence again and checking them out for yourself and making sure it works for you. But I do know Regina highly recommends the communities that she's in. Um, Okay, thank you. So Incredible Tiny Homes does have rental properties. Thank you. I did think that was the tiny house builder. And the add a room option is a separate structure that can be connected. They just started this offering. Very smart. That is kind of we've seen people do that later. It's almost kind of what I've done a little bit, except with the add-on to my tiny house, except part of this is when I say foundation, it is more on piers versus foundation. So the add-on isn't movable, but I don't intend to move my home from here. So that is absolutely smart. Um, very good. Pier foundation. All right. Um, very good. I'm glad you're having these conversations. Um, All right. Thank you all for the information. Incredible tiny homes. Again, I've heard good things about them. So, and as far as I know, they kind of consistently come in from a price point that it's affordable for people. And so that's a good thing and something that we'd want to consider because again, until there's better financing available for tiny houses. It's one of the reasons that keeps a lot of um, BIPOC people out of the movement. So I've heard really good things about them. I'm glad you all are having success in working or in talking to them. All right, I don't see any other questions. Are there any other questions about any of the information that I shared here that I can answer? And I'm sorry, I could have cut off um, the PowerPoint a few minutes ago. It's a one-person show over here doing all this technical work and trying to have a conversation. So, but when I make it, I'm going to have me a whole technical group that's going to do all of this work, and I can just sit here and talk from my mouth to God's ears. All right, I don't see any other questions here. I thank you all very much for your participation, for joining me this afternoon. Next week is a conversation. I haven't identified who we'll be talking to, so it'll be a surprise to you and me as well as I rustle up somebody to talk to them about their participation in and around the tiny house movement. So um, we'll see how that goes. Going once, going twice to see if there are any more questions. Again, this is the time I always say the people who are in my, very welcome. The people who are in my comments asking questions or in inbox. This is the time to ask the free questions. Um, okay. Hey, I'm always available for a consultation. I would love to work with you and help you in this important work. I instead of reinventing the wheel, I think it is important to help have someone who can help you, and I'm more than willing to do that. Very welcome. I will share all of that information. Give me some time to put all of the information in in the description this afternoon. All the details that I said I will share. I will share sometime this afternoon. Motown Investor is asking how much to rent a parking spot. It is going to vary on location, just kind of like housing and pricing for housing is going to vary on location. The West Coast, as I understand it, I've seen people in Facebook groups advertise parking for 800 to $1,000 and up. And for me on the East Coast, that seems um, kind of pricey. But I also know housing on the West Coast is a lot pricier than on the East Coast. On I have paid from $350 to 500, 550, maybe 500. I personally paid that at various locations. Um, so it's going to vary. It's also going to vary according to what you are offering. So if you are within your parking, it includes the cost for utilities. You want to factor that in so that you are covering that. But it's really going to be based on like amenities and um, for your pricing. And I will say that tiny house people are of the mindset that it shouldn't be expensive. I don't want to pay apartment prices for tiny house renting because I own this home. You're going that obviously that is going to depend on the location. I see people, who say when you see parking prices on the West Coast that are $800 and $1,000, and I see some people say, "Oh my God, this is such a high price. What this is unreasonable for somebody with a tiny house." And then you see somebody who is actually from the West Coast who will say this is an absolutely great price because a one bedroom apartment on the East Coast is two, three times this. So it's all relative to location, as real estate is. Um, so that is, I hope that helps answer some of your question. You need a consultation. I have a consultation ready to give you. So, like I said, give me some time, and you will be able to schedule on my calendar as soon as I put all that information in there. And I look forward to working with you. Thank you very much. Wouldn't it be wonderful if many of us came together to build our own community? Absolutely. That is, there are two things, and somebody just said something about a book in the making for me on from tiny houses. If I can get out of my own way of procrastination on my book, there's some procrastination there. But I want to build a tiny house community, and that is kind of like the where I feel for me it's the next step of what I want to do. I have a couple of ideas, like I have a show in my head that I want to do. But I really want to build a tiny house community, and I feel like it's going to happen. I'm trying to make the moves happen so that I can build a community, and also be able to build a community that is a model that can be used in other locations. So I'm trying to speak that into existence for me as well. Um, and then the book in the making. So I don't want to write a book. Like I don't want to do an autobiography. I don't have. If you are, even though I sit over here and I talk a lot, I'm very much an introvert. But I want to create a coffee table book of more pictures of my journey, my with some content, but letting my journey be told from the pictures of my journey. And so that is what I want to do. If I and I just have had this whole conversation with myself and a friend yesterday. If I can just there's a piece of perfectionism that has me in procrastination, and if I could just get out of my own way, it will happen. And so that is something that I have to focus on. Thank you for the encouragement. It is something that I intend to do. I just need to do it. And then was there another question? Are you count you in? Are you saying count me in on in the community? All right, I've got some residents from my community. I'm working on it. I promise you, I'm working on that. And so thank you. Yes, the coffee table book. Thank you. Thank you very much for the encouragement. I need to have a conversation with Jewel this afternoon to get myself together. So I thank you. Oh, thank you very much. All right, let me happy Sunday. Thank you all very much for being great, for participating. Thank you for the encouragement, the compliments. I really, really like to do this so that I can help you all navigate this space if you're a person of color, so that the you're able to get the information and do what you need to do to be successful in this movement. Um, I really need to talk to you and Farmer C because you both will help me with what I'm trying to do. Well, I hope that you listen to the conversation I had with Pharmacy last week, because she put out offer out there for speaking with her if you have a consultation with me, and it sounded like it was free. I'm pretty sure she said free 30 minutes. So get on it, and you can talk to both of us and get going. So thank you very much. I appreciate all of you. Thank you so much. So let me do my close out here. Let me change my screen. And oh, thank you so much. I appreciate that so much. Thank you, thank you, thank you. All right, let me move myself around on this screen again. I appreciate you all very much. You all make my Sundays. All right, so I am closing this out. I thank you all very much. This has been the segment in the conversation series. This has been the What's Your Question. The series is Creating Home, a tiny house series. I am here alternating Sundays in conversation with people, conversations on intimate spaces, which is conversations with people in and around the tiny house movement. And then has been the What's Your Question, where I'm answering a frequently asked tiny house question. So I would ask you and hope that if you find this information and the video helpful, that you like it, you share it, subscribe to the channel, check the notifications, turn the notifications on so that you'll know when content is available, and can join us on Sundays for these segments. I thank you very much for being here, and I hope you have a great Sunday. Thank you all so much for your participation today.